up. Here is the skinny on chapters 18, 19, and 20.
Do you want one of the last rings for us?
What's that? Starburst?
Yeah.
Why don't I have all of them?
Well, I can give you all of them.
No, I just need a couple.
There you go.
Thank you, sir. Good stuff. There better be some yellow and some red in there, or else I'm gonna be mad.
I'll check if there's some yellow ones in here.
Actually, I'm okay. Listen, here's what I have written down. I have students will be responsible for reading chapters 18 through 20 and reviewing notes in class from the last 2 units to help them prepare for the FRQ/DBQ. The notes from chapter 18 will be the last class notes taken prior to the exam, and students will be given a packet of FRQ questions to prepare for going into the AP exam. We've already done that. We've already given you guys that packet, right? So you can take a look at them. The packet that I gave you was very large and long, but I really think it covers everything that you guys could potentially see. So if you're wondering, what can I do to help prepare for this FRQ DBQ, which is really what you should be thinking about, come after tomorrow. Nothing, you said? Well, I think you could probably go through that packet, number one. And number two, just have confidence in the fact that, you know what, you guys have been working your tail off the last 2 weeks. We're just about done with this thing. You guys have worked hard on this all year. So don't get freaked out by the exam on Wednesday, because you've done your homework all year, and you deserve to give yourself a fair shot, because you're awesome, all right? Okay, these notes are going to primarily focus on the Truman presidency. And from there, you guys you need to review JFK on your own. But I'm okay with doing that because it's the most recent stuff that we've talked about in class. Okay? All right. Truman and the Cold War. Truman and the Cold War is what we're going to be looking at here. Number one, let's talk about post-war domestic adjustments. Initially, again, like we talked about at the end of the last section here, we have faltering economy in the U.S. Inflation rises. We've got the GDP going down, partially because we're not making as many war products as we were during the war. We see an increase in strikes. And so one of the things that's done to kind of combat this is the Taft-Hartley bill. I'm sorry, it's not a bill, it's an act. There we go. The Taft-Hartley Act essentially puts a limit on labor unions. There is the outlawing of the closed shop. Which, if you remember, the closed shop essentially says that you have to be a member of the union if you're going to work here, or else you're not going to work here.
How would a union get that through?
Through collective bargaining.
So that the employer agrees to that.
Yep. And in return, they get something in return from the employer. Okay. The teachers union in Wisconsin was a closed shop. All right, or if you were part of the union, if you and your union dues were automatically taken out of your paychecks. Labor unions, labor leaders, excuse me, were required to take a non-communist oath as part of this Taft-Hartley Act. Remember, we're gearing up for the second Red Scare here. There is the war factories. That were, again, sold cheaply to private companies. you're a Mad Men fan here, the GI Bill, Don Draper. No? Okay, fine. Gives people who are coming back from the war, soldiers, the ability to go to school. It pays for, helps them pay for the homes, for farms, and also could be applied to small business loans, part of this GI Bill. The post-war planning for the economy is good. GDP. The GDP of America rises 6%. I'm sorry, let me backtrack here. The GDP rises over the next 2 decades, and America is about 6% of the world's population that controls 40% of the world's money and the wealth. Well, we're still a big-time consumer. We're a spender, all right? Which is why people would say that we're too big to fail, because we have so much debt right now that we're too big to fail. If we go under and we don't pay back our bills, all those foreign investors who have money in America, they're not going to get anything in return. Right? That was Hamilton's plan, right? Yeah. That's what he said. Yeah, debt's not a bad thing. Keeps people interested in what you're doing.
I thought it was like a portion.
Well, yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't be crazy about 17 trillion, but. All right. Middle class doubles, home ownership increases. The fact that we were not touched by a war allows America to not have to worry about cleaning up their own mess, but serving as the architect of the ruined global landscape. We see a rise in education with this GI Bill, and so we see an increase with better technologies available in the U.S. We have a majority of the workforce with this technology that leaves agriculture. So we see bigger farms but fewer people farming. And of course, we see a migration to the suburbs with the automobile playing a big factor here. People drive, commute to work. There's a massive baby boom. And so all of us that are younger, I shouldn't say all of us because you guys are younger than I am, but as you get into the workforce, we're going to be paying for that massive baby boom here. All right? Hey, it is what it is. There's also an impact here on civil rights. Well, one of the impacts you got to think about too is that these people are our big voting bloc too, so it's a done deal. Civil rights. 1948 is my first letter here. 1948 is significant because Truman ends segregation in the federal civil services, and there's a push for equal treatment in the military as well. Remember, that's one of those decisions that Truman talked about in his One Tough SOB of a Man, article that one of those easy decisions for him, but an unpopular decision for everybody else. The election of 1848 is part of this. Democrats were against Truman because of his civil rights stance. And so we see the formation of the Dixiecrats, who are these states' rights advocates. They nominate Governor Strom Thurmond. There's also Henry Wallace, not George Wallace, but Henry Wallace goes in as a progressive. He's the VP. He's running on a separate ticket. The progressives this time actually have a pro-Soviet platform, which is kind of interesting. Of course, there's Dewey, who is the Republican, right? And then there's Truman, who is the Democrat. The problem here is that we see a lot of Democrats going to the Dixiecrats, and there's the belief that the Republicans are basically untouched here, and that there's a three-headed monster facing the Republican Party, and the Republican Party will essentially win the election, similar to what happened in 1912, where the Progressive Party kind of split the Republican vote. The Republican vote with Taft and Roosevelt. Wilson winning. They thought the same thing was going to happen here, only to the next level, because Dewey was facing essentially three opponents who were all fighting for the same vote. Harry Truman goes on to deliver over 300 give 'em hell Harry speeches. All right, give 'em hell, Harry. And Dewey, by all means, should have won the election. The Chicago Tribune famously ran the newspaper title, Dewey defeats Truman. But at the end of the day, the farmers, the working class, and many blacks who were voting were not interested in the Republican Party. And so, in one of the biggest upsets in election history, we see Truman pull it out, all right, at the end. I don't know if he'd be able to do that today, because I think his speeches would have been he had a lot more flexibility to kind of preach to whatever crowd he was talking to. Nowadays, if you give a speech in Pensacola, Florida, they're going to know about it in Des Moines, Iowa, the same day. The campaign with Will Ferrell, where everything he does, kind of shows how he kind of
Filipino Tulsa World operators.
Yes, exactly. And everybody drives America, right? You can't do that today because cable news will eat you up. All right.
Because it was about the 47% for the secret meeting, and then they'll.
That'll come back and bite you too. We're never going to get 47% of the vote. We just got to get the other 53. I'd like to have that one back, I think. I'd like to have that one back. That wouldn't have happened back in the day. All right. Can't talk about post-war containment. Without talking about containment in Europe and the Middle East. Of course, we see the Truman Doctrine go through here during this time. Essentially, there's $400 million spent for Greece and Turkey to help fight communism. The bigger issue that we're facing with the Truman Doctrine is to try to help people fight free peoples, we would call them free peoples, protect them from outside influences of communism during the time period. The problem with this is what? What do we do as a result of supporting these non-communists? Supporting basically anything that's not communist. What do we end up doing? We end up going to bed with some pretty nasty people who are not communists, but they're not really good people either. A lot of tyrants who were facing opposition, who would claim that they were going to be overturned by communist rebels. We'd go to their aid, and so we do some we back some not so nice people, especially like in Central and South America. All right. Another big thing here for with Europe, as part of this containment issue, is the Marshall Plan. We go through and we make capitalism attractive. Part of the Marshall Plan is to make capitalism attractive and to resist communism. $12.5 billion, John. $12.5 billion. You bet. To help rebuild Europe. We become this economic miracle for these countries. And so they are going to take our side because we help to rebuild them. If we don't help to rebuild them, there's a chance that their economies will go to ruins, and of course, communism will take over. Which I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. I think we're kind of going in with the assumption that if you're that worried about communism spreading, then maybe something's wrong with capitalism. I don't know if that would have been necessarily the case for everybody, but there was enough of a threat that we decided we need to do this. There's also the Berlin crisis that takes place during this time. If you remember, Berlin was divided. It's actually in East Germany, but it's divided into 4 sections, with each of the powers holding on to a section of the city. There becomes an East and a West Berlin. Remember, Russia lost a ton of people during both World War I and World War II, so their thought is they've got to create some buffer states, some satellite nations, and they want East Germany to be a satellite nation. And so there's the whole airlift to Berlin to try to help the Western society, living people who are in the city, have food and supplies. Berlin is of symbolic importance to America, and they want to protect their interests in that city, as do the rest of, well, I guess would be France and England, the other countries that are involved in it. We see the formation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Here we are, Mr. George Washington. We're getting in bed here with the UN and NATO. Ugh, these long-standing foreign alliances, these entanglements here. What would he say? Probably wouldn't like it too much. 12 countries originally say that an attack on one is an attack on all. It's really just a gang, folks. That's all it is. Bloods and Crips here. That's what we're talking about, right? You ever been in a gang, Jordan? You sure? All right. It's good. All right. Just wanted to make sure. The isolationists in the country are officially defeated, and it officially ended American isolationism. Helps to unite Europe, which I guess you could say eventually leads to the European Union there. There's probably some I guess some seeds planted here that eventually lead to the European Union. And it kind of helps to militarize Western Europe in case of an attack from the Soviet Union, the Soviet satellite nations during the Cold War. (1949) comes around, and Truman announces that the Soviets have tested a nuclear weapon. So if you have a Cold War question and you're asked about issues, you could talk about little nice little nugget to put in there in your introduction about the Soviets testing in 1949. In 1952, the U.S. Develops the hydrogen bomb. The Soviets get a hydrogen bomb the next year. I blame the Rosenbergs. That's just me. I could be wrong. And so there's constant escalation here going on during this time period. Another important tidbit here you want to have down is the revolution in China. Remember, there was Chiang Kai-shek, who was spelled that's how you spell his name. He's defeated by the communist Mao Zedong and is banished to Taiwan. I think it's pronounced Kai-shek. Is that what it's? It's a yeah. J-I-E-S-H-I. Yikes. All right. Interesting. He's banished to Taiwan. Zedong takes over. Mao Zedong is the communist leader. And so we enter this struggle here where we don't recognize the Chinese government. We only recognize Chiang's government. And it essentially looks like the U.S. has lost China to communism. And so we spend some time looking for someone else to blame and point the finger to. And then, of course, it all comes around here to the Korean War. Part of the hey man, what can I say? I did have some people viewing my YouTube videos from last year. There's a possibility that they probably just said, you know what, this Russ guy, he knows what he's talking about. He's a good guy. Let's base an entire book off of what, I should probably call them up. I should sue them. Oh, if only it was that easy. If only these notes were posted online by somebody else first. All right, the Korean War. Korea is divided into Russian and U.S. spheres. of influence at the 38-degree parallel. So 38 degrees, 38 parallel. We've got North Korea. They started it. They invade South Korea, and then good old Douglas MacArthur. He looks, I'm sorry, some of the pictures of him are not very flattering in our textbook. Doesn't he kind of look a whack job a little bit? No? All right, maybe not. Maybe it's just me. But he does. But especially with the glasses on when he's like pointing. Like, Jesus is a mean guy. He's just a mean man. Just a mean-spirited man. He pushes the Koreans back with the UN soldiers he's leading, the UN forces. He pushes them all the way back to the Chinese border. He's told not to go into China. He wants to go into China, though, right? And the Chinese end up taking arms, and they push back the UN forces all the way back to the original 38th parallel. And so we're kind of at a stalemate. We see Truman come through with NSC 68, executive order here, which essentially quadruples the defense spending. Truman, and this is, we start to see this slippery slope here that ends up causing, I think, if you look at history, this is something that Dwight Eisenhower warns about in his presidency, we start to spend a lot of money on military funding, all right, and we become a military industrialized country, and it leads to some issues, especially when it comes time to cut back on government spending, and we're cutting back right now on our military spending. All these people who have jobs in military-type work environments, they're going to be potentially losing their jobs, so our unemployment rate's going to go up a little bit. We see it with Oshkosh Truck today, up where I'm from, Marinette Marine. Those people are going to be hurting for work here in the coming years, potentially. So there's the belief that the American economy, with Truman here during this time, there's a belief that the American economy can handle any expenditure on defense. I'm not sure if he ever challenged them to a steel cage match in Madison Square Garden, but there was a lot of heat between MacArthur and Truman during this time. MacArthur calls out Truman and says that he is there to appease. He's a communist appeaser because he won't go into China. MacArthur's upset because he feels he has to fight a limited war. And so he says, we need to nuke China. That's his thing. Hey, let's just nuke China. Let's do it. Now, if you know your history, you know that there hasn't been any nuclear wars, any nuclear bombs used since Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? So it's probably a good thing that we don't nuke China because we probably have a lot more nuclear explosives going off in the past 60 years. Than we have. Truman has no choice. MacArthur's calling him out, so what does he do? Fires him, all right? Fires him.
Wait, was the steel cage match going to hold bar?
Oh, they always are. That wasn't developed yet.
Extreme rules?
I would have liked to make maybe I don't know, barbed wire ropes kind of get a little thumbtacks that gets a little messy, all right? I don't think that was really their style. They were sophisticated. But I don't think that a regular square circle would have held the cage. They would have had to go steel cage. They just would have had to.
Pay-per-view, obviously.
I would have liked to have seen Truman. I don't know if he would have. I think MacArthur would have got to the top of the steel cage and tried to go like Jimmy Snuka with the body drop. I think he would have missed, though. And then Truman would have walked out the door. That's just how I think it would have ended.
What were they fighting for?
It's just to bomb China. Who's in charge here? Is it MacArthur in the military, or is it the president? And that's actually the question that Truman has to answer. That's a very easy question for him. I'm in charge. Truman says, I'm in charge, and so MacArthur, you're fired. And even though you return home a war hero, guess what, buddy? At the end of the day, you ain't nothing. That's it for notes, guys. 19 and 20 are on your own.